rolling.
Okay. How should we start this?
Just maybe like that.
Like that.
Say, how should we start?
So how should we start this?
Okay. So
Okay.
do you want to give us a 3, 2, 1?
Okay. How should we start this, Lara?
I think we have. I think that's how you start. You just start talking, and then it goes from there.
And we're here
People
together.
conventionally introduce themselves, so
Okay,
we could
so-
start there.
Okay, I'm Terry MacLeod,
I'm Lara Rae.
and we are together.
Together, we're the co-hosts of the Manitoba Book Awards
Book Awards,
this year. Yeah.
April 22nd, and we're here to talk about Manitoba books and books that have set us on fire and new ideas
And books we've set on fire. that dark time in Manitoba history. No, we're and what makes a writer Manitoban? Do you think?
Are you
other than geographically?
Are you asking the question?
I'm interviewing you for a change. I think it's time people got to know you, as opposed to getting to know you through other people.
I can't remember how many times I've interviewed you.
I know you've interviewed me many times now. Now the tables have turned, so to speak.
What do you want to know?
What do you think makes a writer Manitoban, other than, geographic coincidence?
Well, I had the good fortune of hosting on the radio for CBC for quite a number of years. And
Plugging yourself is a good part of being a Manitoba writer.
No, I'm a reader, not a writer. But I always focused on stories that were intensely about here.
Right.
And
right.
whether they were fiction or nonfiction or books of geography or books of history, I was always really intrigued with getting underneath the surface.
A sense of place.
And a sense of who lives here and how we got here. Mm-hmm. And I've found, like, for example, I've been reading these books.
Right.
Like this Sam Klein mystery from Alan Levine.
Right.
He's brought back his detective, Sam Klein.
Right, yes.
And this one, The Bootlegger's Confession. Now, I read his earlier trilogy of detective novels, and Sam Klein, North End detective.
What period are we talking about?
10s, 20s, 30s.
So sort of Chicago of the North time.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. This book, I think, was inspired, in fact, by the Bronfmans, who had their
Right.
beginnings in the liquor trade in Manitoba. But I love it. His detective, Sam Klein, lives on Cathedral Avenue in the North End.
Right, yeah.
Like, you could do a walking tour of Alan Levine's mystery novels just by going through the neighborhood with the book in hand.
Some books are like maps of our towns and our cities. Jordan Marin's Under the Rips of Death, to me, is like that too. You can really picture that forgotten
I've never
time.
read that, but
it's a beautiful book.
I've heard that.
It's a beautiful book.
Yeah.
And what I love is there's this great scene, you took the streetcar across the St. Vital Bridge, and it was literally to cross into a Edenic kind of paradise, because that's where the rich, and then the teeming immigrant North End, there was a real dichotomy. There still is, but it was a different kind of dichotomy,
I'm a big fan of David Bergen, and one of his earlier novels, The Case of Lena S., one of his characters walks down my street.
Really, yeah. It's amazing.
Like, he used to teach at Kelvin High School,
Yeah.
and I live not that far from Kelvin. But when I was reading the book thinking, she's on my street, suddenly I'm in the novel in this way that I couldn't have anticipated.
And then our geography is like a pamphlet set, because there's so many layers archaeologically, right?
Yeah.
There was a land before we put our artificial turf on it, right? And our artificial farms, and the whole indigenous history before we had names, or we had different names for things, is part of our history. Our history goes back. Well, it goes back millennium.
Yes.
If you want to really look at it that way, it's so deep and rich.
And speaking of Indigenous history, one of the authors I talked to late in the fall was Maureen Matthews with her book Namiwan's Drum, which is a book about an artifact that was given away from a museum at the University of Winnipeg. But the story brings us into the world of the Ojibwe community of Pongassi, where Maureen's collaborator, Roger Roulette, says they speak Shakespearean Ojibwe.
So this is a book originally written in Ojibwe.
No, but it's interesting you should say that. It's About half the book is in Ojibwe,
Okay.
and the other half is in English. And if you want to compare and contrast what has been written, if you want to look at the Ojibwe, and it's not in syllabics, it's in kind of a Roman orthography, but you want to understand Ojibwe deeply in the conceptual stuff. This was part of Maureen's research that she did when she was at the University of Oxford, and turned it into this magnificent book.
And we have such a thriving French culture as well, and some of these writers have gone on to international fame and merit,
Well,
Gabriel
Roger
Roland,
Leveillé, who's
Roger
a
Leveillé,
giant,
yes.
yeah. Another book that I had a wonderful time with in the fall was this book, Abandoned Manitoba.
Abandoned Manitoba, yes.
Which is all about the lost and forgotten places of
Oh, I thought it was
Manitoba.
about losing a AAA credit rating. I thought we'd been abandoned by the banks. Nothing serious. This is just empty buildings. Never mind.
Yeah, and buildings, almost like shadows of buildings, because in some cases the
there were
buildings are
shops in
gone.
Portage Place, just to let.
You are clearly going to be a troublesome co-host on the 22nd.
Tell me about it. So, Abandoned Manitoba.
Yeah. Well, now, I'm
This
not
is
talking
beautiful.
about... I wrote the introduction for it because the book had its origins on the Weekend Morning Show. It was a
Yes.
series that we started there, and then one of the great publishers in Manitoba said to Gordon Goldsborough, why don't you turn this into a book? And so this book has been on the bestseller list since it came out in November. Marvelous book, still on the McNally's bestseller list now. And this is a follow-up to Gordon's earlier book about Delta Marsh.
Right.
And which Gordon introduced me to Delta Marsh, I guess about 10 years ago, when he used to run the research station for the University of Manitoba out there. Incredible place, incredible history, deep history, not just of human settlement there, but the animal populations, fish, the mystery of Lake Manitoba. It's our most misunderstood, little understood lake. And the marsh at the bottom of the lake. I just can't get enough of this guy. He's really fun to read.
And this is, and it tells so much about our history because, abandoned from residential schools, abandoned, in disgrace to some degree. Bank vaults. If you go to any dance club in the city, you go downstairs, there's a huge vault because they're abandoned marble banks, And then grain elevators, of course, a testament to a kind of a dying industry and a dying way of life.
There was another book that you saw on the shelf that you wanted to talk about.
I wanted to talk about this because this is called A Safe Girl to Love. And it's by Casey Platt, who, among other things, won the Lambada Award, which is the GBLT, the North American award for the best collection of the year. This is happens to be short stories. And again, you can really see the city.
Can you? Really?
Yes, in the various neighborhoods and so on. And stories involving primarily trans women, of which she is one. And just quite beautiful, and really speaks to the idea of just how inside we're all the same, and we're all people with the same struggles and values that everybody has, and it's just a beautiful book.
For as long as I've known you, I've always described you as the best read person in Winnipeg. What book in the last little while has had a big impact on you?
Well, there's two. I mean, I'm not trying to be chauvinistic here, for Manitoba, but three books actually have a tremendous influence on me, not only as a reader and a writer, are Adele's book, The Sacrifice. Adele Weissman's book. The Sacrifice, which won the Governor General's Award in 1959, and Saul Bellow spoke so highly of. And then she waited years, I think, until 1974 for her follow-up book, which I think is even better, and an undiscovered masterpiece, which is Crackpot, which is a gorgeous book and experimental to some degree. Took her over 20 years to write. Under the Ribs of Death, I mentioned, is a kind of a very dark, Horatio Alger story, and very much speaks to the world today, where a young person is really just interested in success and climbing the ladder, and gives up everything that was valuable in himself to attain it, and realizes that at the end it's utterly worthless. It's a great quote from Paradise Lost, Under the Ribs of Death. So I quite like that.
Is that where
as
it comes
well.
from?
It comes from actually no, it comes from Comus, I believe, a poem, but it comes from Milton. It comes from a Milton poem. And and The Sacrifice is just a gorgeous movie about Jewish immigrants and very Old Testament and the tragedy that happens in this particular book.
I can hardly wait until the Manitoba Book Awards, April 22nd at the Hotel Fort Garry. It's going to be a blast.
I'm going to have a nice outfit too. That's what
Well,
I'm so
then
excited
I'm
about.
going to have a nice outfit.
so
too.
excited about that part.
I doubt if I can match yours, though.
No, you probably can. I'm sure you can.
Lara, it's been great fun.
It's been nice.
Let's talk some more.
Let's go get
Okay.
drunk in Prairie Ink. Neither of us drink. You can cut that part.
No, we keep that part.
I missed that part. Say it again.